what I'm going to try and do in a very rapid fire fashion, so please don't try and take notes. It's not the intent of a keynote. What I hope is to give you some insight into what's happening strategically at a global level, as well as give you some ideas that even if you go home and don't call any of the vendors, but you probably will, things you can do as an executive to lead from where you are. And that's going to be some of the core themes. And I put these up because people are like, well, who's the guy on stage? I have had the luck of the Irish in my life over the last 30 years to have some of the most dream jobs on the face of the planet. I founded the program for NCIS, now a TV show, for those of you a little younger. For those of you a little younger, Sean and I are both proof that we weren't that thin, we weren't that cute, and we can't solve crime in 38 minutes when you take all the commercials out. So the issue with this is the reality of our jobs is you better love this job because you're going to spend 12, 13, and on some occasions, 23 hours a day working a breach or working an issue. I've also worked in the commercial sector. Since general officers don't read very much, usually the same resumes in pictures, for those of you who like it that way. These logos are places I've had the honor of working with, and walking across the seal of the CIA every morning is just a shot in the arm that I cannot explain. So for those of you younger in the career field, if you have a chance to do government service in any way, shape, or form, absolutely consider it as a great part of your career. So one of the things we've been talking about is zero trust today. And what I'm going to say is zero trust, and I believe Diane and other keynote speakers are going to talk about this. This is not new. It is a new term for an old concept. It is still, 30 years later, CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Bell bottoms are now called flare pants. Mainframes are now called cloud, and endpoints are dumb-X terminals where all the data is in the cloud. Okay, I'm glad you've all renamed it. It's not that new. And I hope that, in a way, empowers not only the gray beards and gray hairs in the audience, but the young kids in the audience who have technology in your career I couldn't even dream of at the beginning of mine. And back in those days, since Sean's here and Wynn's here, back in 1998, we did a briefing called In Harm's Way, where basically a terrorist could get from a news story all the way to the pictures of the people on a Navy ship that launched the missiles. So when you talk about information bleeding out, when you talk about OPSEC, when you talk about adversaries able to figure out who the CFO is to run a CFO scam, a lot of these are also not particularly new. Same thing with Moonlight Maze. 20 years ago, an adversary group of foreign intel officers were scraping out, then this term was big news, gigabytes. I understand that now gigabytes are not that big a thing, it's more like terabytes. However, it was the world's largest intellectual property theft of its kind. The reason I share this slide is because this case was not broken only on our ability to get logs and to analyze the bad guys. It was data visualization that truly taught us what the adversary was stealing. We had to use tools from Pacific Northwest National Labs to answer questions where no other tool existed. And that's one of the amazing things we'll talk about as we go through. Always look for and preserve your data sources. And the final bit, and then I'm going to get into some fun stuff, is for those of you in our community, and every time I'm honored enough to lead off a day like today, as you leave this place and you go through all these great briefings and all of the tracks today, it is about leveling it up to the enterprise risk management discussion. If you think walking into a boardroom is watering down or dumbing down IT, it's exactly the opposite. It is we have to speak not at the business, we have to speak the business. And the final thing of zero trust as we speak as a member of the business table, as a CISO, as an executive, nobody ever, any CFOs in the audience or accountants or recovering accountants? I was raised by an accountant, so no CFO has ever briefed what database the 10K report came out of, ever in the history of boardrooms. The database the report came out of doesn't matter. The firewall the logs came out of doesn't matter. What matters is the insight in business decisions. And there's a lot of fun things we can talk about in this. But before I get into the data side, I was asked, because I used to work in DC, and friends of mine, Sean flew out from there quite recently, what is the threat? Oh, I'm sorry, before I get into that, other famous dead guy quotes, because you always got to start a brief with dead guy quotes. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And when you can't measure it, your knowledge is of meek and unsatisfactory kind. Lord Kelvin. Veni vidi vici, I came, I data visualized, I conquered. Yep. And then experts often possess more data than judgment. Colin Powell's not dead, at least I haven't checked the news this morning, I don't think he's dead. But the general does owe me $1, so we had a discussion. And hey, Sean, just for you. My favorite quote of all time. We're completely surrounded. This simplifies our problem. Chesty Puller, United States Marine Corps, when surrounded at Chosin Soren, he basically said to his troops, you can shoot in any direction, it's fine. there's no friendlies out there. So the other thing about threat, what is the threat matrix of your organization? Who's out to get you? So with today's group, I went to DC and I asked a bunch of different friends. The State Department says there are no enemies, only emerging allies. The CIA says we know who they are, but telling you would endanger our sources out in the field. NSA says you're not cleared for that code word. Director of National Intelligence, whoever the threat is, we're in charge of fighting them. The US Marines, doesn't matter, mess with the best, die like the rest. And the FBI thinks it's the CIA. But who's the real threat? Get the picture of a kid in a hoodie out of our world. Get that image out of your heads, get it out of your boardrooms. This is $1 trillion industry. Conferences and rooms filled with smart people like you in North Korea, in Eastern Europe, in Nigeria. They are regimented. They are using machine learning and AI in ways that are hurting our economy and our country. The ransomware epidemic, while it's gone down in number, is gone up in efficiency. We are seeing more and more of the ransomwares be very successful at getting to the backups or having a dual extortion ransomware where it is basically the first ransom is for your backups and the decryption key is what you're paying for. The second ransom is for exfiltrated data and the embarrassment of its publication. So there are now two halves of the extortion. The first one is very not optional. And there's a lot of discussion, and I wish Secret Service was here today, to talk about, well, you shouldn't pay. I don't know about the rest of you, extortion was never a volunteer sport in the first place, and paying extortion has always been illegal, regardless of whether it's now also an OFAC violation, but paying protection money was not a legal act to begin with. This was not a voluntary transaction. So the prohibition not to pay, the discussion is not whether you want to pay or don't pay. The discussion is, do you want your children back? And do you have another copy of them available to not pay the ransom? And if the answer is no, you're going to end up paying that ransom or going out of business and ceasing to exist. That's the discussion. Pay or go out of business, not your preference to give money to evil. We need to make sure that if that happens, you're ready for that in your ransomware preparedness. We'll talk about that. The other thing is, if it is an OFAC violation and the insurance company doesn't want to pay the ransom, you're still being extorted. You're just being extorted for your own money now, not the insurance company's money. The adversary doesn't care. They're extorting you. They don't care who wrote the check to pay the ransom. So as we talk about insurance and other things, make sure you understand in your cyber policy, in your crime policy, in your E&O and your D&O, all these other weird policies. Go hug your chief risk officer. They got to figure that out. Make sure you understand more about it, and I'll talk about that and how I go through some things today. And final bit, for those who expect that this is a new topic, one of my favorite case examples from the year 2000. I've never actually visited a shire before. I've seen them in movies. But Maroochy Shire over in Australia, a disgruntled employee was hacking on the waste management system, war dialing and driving around after he was fired, and dumped 800 liters of raw sewage into a local park there. And then since then, in 2008, a bunch of people with laptops attacked a pipeline in Turkey. and they were able to basically shut down the cameras and the video footage as well. At the same time, a group on the ground was overpressurizing and removing the safety checks out on the pipeline itself. So the attacks on infrastructure, what we're seeing in the Ukraine, none of this is new. What I'm going to quickly do is get down into what zero trust is. Oh, the final bit, I guess, is it is point and click crime. I can rent a command and control dashboard for $90 for a whole ransomware that includes all the platforms, support, and a help desk. We will add file types for $90 a month. You can go on the dark web. How many of you have been on the dark web? Okay. You can, luckily the Secret Service isn't here because they'd be writing down names and table positions. For those of you that haven't, it's the same thing as the regular web. This is the eBay of evil, one of the alpha bays that have all been taken down, whichever. I know all of you on the web, on the dark web, are like, that's an old page. Yes, it is, but still. You can buy humans, you can buy malware, you can buy a whole ransomware kit, and they'll run it for you and even have a help desk for your victims. And then they'll take their 15 or 20% off the top and give you the money. It's that simple to target other companies. That's the discussion. And by the way, the people that write the software have nothing to do with people that deploy it, have nothing to do with the infiltration team or the exploitation team, and have very little to do with the people that do the payments and all that. You are being handed through the, I don't want to pick on too many logos, the Amazon of evil, the eBay of evil, whatever, the Microsoft of evil. You're being handled through a bureaucracy of groups that don't meet each other. So when you're talking to the person to negotiate your ransom, they're not the person that hacked into your system, stole your data. They got a pallet of data and you're just being moved down the exploitation line. So what does this mean to zero trust? And what does it look like from the insurance market? Zero trust, and we're going to go much more in the next briefing into a 700 slide architecture discussion, right? 700 slides? It seems to be that everybody loves this new discussion of zero trust. The core component of zero trust is extreme segmentation, extreme identity management, knowing where your data is, having it tagged, all these kind of things. For those of you a little older in the audience, does any of this sound new at all? No. It's good network design, and we'll talk a bit about it, but how does the insurance company view it? Through our loss runs. How many times we have to pay out checks because if at the top there is a dip in ransomware, but what we're seeing is the ransom payments are going up on average. Now everybody sees these averages in the 200,000 and 400,000 and a lot of the great reports out there. Most of the cases I'm working, $5 million, $10 million, $20 million are the ransoms. A lot of times what I believe is the ransomware attackers go out on the internet, find the annual revenue, not income or profit of your company, the annual revenue, and take about 5% or 6%. And the other thing that's horrible to think about is the ransomware, when you're done a ransomware incident, is about 8% of the ultimate cost of that to your organization. All of the restoration, all of the incident response, all the legal, all the shareholder lawsuits, the ransom is the least of your worries besides the incident response team that's like the water bill for the fire department. So the way that the insurance industry views zero trust, we're going to see it in two basic ways. We're going to see zero trust architecture as you start to try and qualify for insurance, and the underwriters are talking to you about underwriting your policy, and I'll show you some of those questions. There's gold in there, I'll tell you in a bit. And we're going to see the claims. We're going to see the house fires. So here's the scary part. For the claims adjusters, the first times they're going to hear zero trust is when it failed. There's an analytic bias of the first experiences claims adjusters are going to have with zero trust are the people that probably did it wrong. A scary thought, isn't it? They're going to learn the wrong way about hearing the words zero trust on the claims side. They will hear better on the underwriting side when you're trying to qualify for cyber insurance. The other stats we want to do on this is the incident rates are down over the last couple quarters, but we're seeing a huge uptick for law firms, professional consulting groups, and those entrusted with the secrets of others, especially PII, PHI, and health data, because there's more attention on the exfiltration extortion than there is on the encryption extortion. In fact, some of the adversaries are now going to just exfiltrating and leaving the business running to earn money and then extorting them. The ways you can get ahead of it, and then we're going to talk about the core parts of zero trust. What we're going to see this year, stabilizing rate increases. So in insurance last year, there was 100%, 150% increase in premiums. That's called the market's hardening. Too many people had deep fat fried cyber turkeys in their living room and caused insurance claims. Now these are cyber turkeys, but still same concept. Causing payouts of cyber claims, which causes the underwriting process to become more stringent. And therefore the market hardens and the rates go up. What we're seeing this year is the increases are in the 60 or 70% of still going up. So the analogy is, it's like there's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's a smaller train this year than it was the big train last year. Still going to hurt when it hits you, but not as badly. But where does that mirror out? It mirrors out in what the underwriters are doing to qualify. So how many of you have been through cyber insurance qualifications over the last 2 years as cybersecurity professionals? Okay, very few, fewer than I was expecting with the answer. Oh, and one of those people was my own, and an expert in the field. So what are the underwriters asking for? And this is where, with the follow-on keynotes, this is the important list. Multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection, phishing training, incident response, secure VPN, patch management, access control, disaster recovery and backups, email filtering, 0-day and your patch cadence, network segmentation, and mergers and acquisitions due diligence. When you buy a house, what kind of inspections do you have? You have, go ahead. Termite inspection. You, say again? Plumbing inspections. Might have somebody come and look at the foundation. Mold inspections. Perfect, perfect. So mold inspection. All those inspections are to make sure you're not buying a house that's riddled with a problem. The same needs to happen in cyber. If you're in a portfolio company, if you're in a large organization that acquires and onboards, you don't want to bring a termite-infested sofa into a house that doesn't have them. You don't want to add the weak part of the fence line to an organization that's secure. These are the 12 root causes that would have stopped the spark or spread of all of the house fires. And this reflexive list, if you don't have MFA on everything, they'll say, do you have MFA applied everywhere, every time, all the time? And you're like, no. You'll hear a click. They will hang up the phone. They will just stop the process. It's almost like saying, imagine if you went to your car insurer and said, I like knitting my own seat belts. They'd be like, yeah, no. I tore the airbags out of my cars. I don't need smoke detectors in my kids' bedrooms. I'm going to get home insurance. Those are the kind of things where it is definitely, this list shouldn't be looked upon as a problem. This list and the questions that underpin it, and what I'm going to show you in the next 10 minutes or so, and then I'll open it up for questions, is the big data analytics of all of the cyber problems of the globe coming back at you in a very concise set of questions. Those questions and these issues, 5 years from now, will be added to the NIST standard. The standards lag insurance. The requirement to have seatbelts and airbags was made by the insurance industry and then made a requirement 2, 3, 4, 5 years later when the supply chains can catch up. So the intelligence about how you should architect that all of us are missing, and I was before I took this job, is hidden in the questions in the insurance forms. It is some of the best intel you'll ever see. And for those that think more visually, this is the same list of 12 on a kill chain. These are not picked randomly. When you're having that insurance discussion, it is big math, the law of big numbers, the law of good architecture, the law of all of the various organizations. And we saw when M&A due diligence failed, when awareness and training failed, when EDR didn't stop the spread, when incident response and backups were the only thing that saved the ship. Now, I'm prior Navy. To me, These are the 5 compartments of the Titanic. How many of them need to be broken before the whole ship sinks? 3 or 4 usually. One you might survive. If you're in the physical world, these are the 5 rooms of your house, from the front door to your bedroom where your fireproof safe is. Each of these are just the smoke detectors, radon detectors, fire doors, sprinkler systems, and fireproof safes of our day. They are no different. I honestly, still to this day, and I'm not going to learn it, I don't know how the inside of a smoke detector works. Do any of you, by show of hands, really know how it works? Okay, there's one. He's the ringer. We should talk to him at lunch. There's something in there that's nuclear. You're not supposed to crack it open, and when mist goes in, it gets angry and beeps. That's about all I know about a smoke detector, but I don't need to know anything more to deploy them across a factory, to deploy them across a military base. Those same issues in zero trust, this is why you're going to get declined on cyber insurance. If you don't have them, they will walk away. This is the insight that comes from a process most people see as an affront. By doing this, by doing these questions and engaging in this kind of the big math that's coming out of this, you'll actually be ahead of the NIST standards. You'll actually be ahead of the HIPAA regulations. You'll actually be on the cutting edge of zero trust infrastructure because it's the core parts of good network architecture that have always existed. And the technologies that we see on our side are the leading edge a lot of times. Now on the other side, the claim side, they see the bleeding edge. So how does it all come together for risk officers? What we're going to do is go from big math to what I would call little math, your math. And this goes directly into, I'll quickly go through this and then open it for questions, is what we do at Aon is one of the things we've done is taken those insurance questions, the first 95 questions. Now there's 95 questions on a base form, and then there's a ransomware supplemental where you talk about how many accounts you have, and then there's a cyber supplemental on top of that. So about 250 questions for a large organization to qualify for cyber insurance. There are small forms for small and medium businesses, so don't worry, there's Cover Wallet and some other things I can talk to you about. But what we do is then take questions like this. For those of you that think, oh, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to implement a smoke detector, I'm just going to go buy insurance. It doesn't work like that. I don't know who was placing those policies. The qualifications, do you protect your wireless networks, default passwords, access restricted, WPA encryption? They'll talk to you about whether using DMARC. These questions are incredible as a data source for architects because you're seeing all the architecture questions of the arson investigators before they'll place an insurance policy. And we break them into the 9 major categories of NIST, but everything like, are you getting a third-party pen tester? Do they do physical pen testing as well as virtual? A lot of the insurance agencies are now using BitSite reports on all of you. So if you haven't looked at your BitSite report, go look at it, and first thing, address all the false positives. If BitSite's here, I love you, but there's a lot of false positives. And then address all the other crap in the BitSite report so you won't have to address it 6 months from now. What we do is then take all those questions and calculate what is basically a credit score along all these areas. We calculate among the 9 parts of the NIST the score of your questions and the peers around you. What are the other agencies of the same shape and size as you? The reason we do that is because when underwriters place insurance for hospitals or for financial institutions or for manufacturing, they group you into these peer groups so they know like kinds of risk. And we're able to take that data, and this doesn't go out to market, it just goes back to the executives and give them their score, their peer group, and the overall industry average, and then break down these things into whether they were the maturity level of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And here's what I'll tell you, these 34 or 35 areas. Backups in a 1. You can talk to your executives about the need to move backup from 1 to 3. That project is going to cost 50 grand. You don't have to dissect what that object is for the executive to understand, looking at the dirty dozen, it's on the top 12 bad things list. Looking at architecture, knowing we need backups, and knowing a 1 is not a good score, they can make an executive decision to fund a backup project without being dragged into discussing what Veeam is great backups, and many others. You shouldn't have to, not because you've watered it down, because you've leveled it up. You're talking to the business about strategy. You're not talking to them about fixing the engine on a Brinks truck. You're not talking to the general about picking up a wrench and fixing a tank. It's what we need to do. We've had our white coats on for 30 years. We've been kind of insulated from having to have peer review of our genius architecture discussions. Everybody in this room has knitted some great seatbelts over the years that have worked. We've all done it. But what's going to happen, and the reason I took this job at Aon, is because 5 years ago, nobody in this room even thought about cyber insurance. 5 years from now, you won't be allowed to operate without it. Just like with car insurance and homeowners insurance and the other things that followed. Insurance always quietly uses big math to drive safety, reduce costs, and let business people survive explosions or running into things. And the final bits on this, and then I'll open it up for questions, is I was talking to some of our other keynote speakers, and what I just completed was this for an entire state. We did this type of questionnaire for 40 government organizations all at once and took all of the data in access control, two-factor authentication, access management, password strength, all of that, and we're able for the first time to do what I call a cyber census across an entire state, or you could do it across the 100 companies of a PE firm. And we're able to diagnose quick things like, here are the best organizations in the state, and here are the slowest gazelles. And yes, for those asking in the back, yes, this data is obfuscated and randomized based on the real data. However, I created a synth set and I'm doing these visualizations. So you can see which organizations in education now at the top, where they rank compared to health, other, and the public sector ones as well. We're able to take the math across an entire organization and talk about the red flags. All the red flags, to be a red flag, just so I use that term, is MFA. So if they just fixed MFA across these 40 organizations, the blood red snow will disappear from the top of the mountain, and the organization will have that many less flags. If you have insufficient security monitoring and you fix that, the yellow snow goes away, and nobody wants yellow snow. And what it allowed us to do was, my favorite visualization was this. Look here at two-factor authentication as an example. You can now look across 50 subsidiary units, or 50 government organizations, or 50 schools. And you could say, well, wait a minute, this is an interesting story. I have some people who are winning and some people who are lagging. And even without leaving the organization or hiring a consultant, you can have your leaders talk to your laggers within your own organization and do knowledge exchange. Or you could say, you know what? I'm going to go buy MFA for the entire state and fix this whole column. This is where I want to dissuade people that the insurance company isn't using big math in cyber. They are. But if you're not hearing it, go find your chief security or your chief risk officer. Go talk to your legal department about shiver insurance and figure out what that process is, more than just them bugging you twice a year to fill out the form and you being angry because it's yet another form, because it is. But I'm telling you, there's gold in those questions. You will get insights into things that regulators won't figure out to complain about for another 12 months. And it will directly and immediately support your move to whatever architecture, be it more secure, zero trust, fill in buzz phrase here. It's about confidentiality, integrity, availability. It's no longer this perimeter thing. But even with zero trust, you still have to trust the backup to go all over and back everything up. You have to trust the SEM and SOAR tools to go get the logs from each of these things. There's going to be a trust there. You're going to have to micro-segment that. So whether you're on the managerial side, I hope I've given you a strategy on how to get market intelligence far ahead of the norm. If you're on the technical side, I guarantee you, acting like these are questions you're being asked on the stand and reverse engineering them is going to be fun for you. And the final thing I'll say is it used to be that for insurance, they'd talk to you about 90 days out, and they'd ask you a bunch of questions, and then they'd complete the form. Start the process 2 to 3 quarters early so you can take those outputs, so you can take this report and figure out the score on your test 6 months in advance of the SAT, look at the dirty dozen, have the projects and funding from your head shed to move them to where you want them to be. And this same external due diligence that's coming from the insurance industry is the thing that will ultimately be what is the external due diligence from regulators and what ultimately becomes the next standard. It is that type of tectonic shift that I hope you leave this room understanding so you can now look at the questionnaires and other things and be ahead of it and a little bit more relaxed in a profession where none of us get much sleep. I look forward to your questions and very much appreciate your time.
Anyone with questions? We have a mic set up right there. Please come on up. Don't be shy. I'm sure you have some questions for this gentleman. Thank you.
I'll try not to be. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting with the scorecard piece, and I've built things like this in the past, and I actually just got challenged to do this again. And the thing that's been dogging me is the self-reporting bias, meaning they say, yes, I have a patch management solution, but then when you dive into it, it's, yes, I can patch my Microsoft systems, but I have no idea what to do with Linux and Microsoft and everything else. When doing a bigger program like that, how do you deal with that self-reporting bias?
Great question. And what we've seen over the years as these questions evolve, you'll see, and in something as simple as configuring wireless. Wireless access is disabled on devices that do not have a business purpose for wireless access. There's not a bunch of extra ones. The questions get better and better because they're like, oh, they figured out a new way to burn down the house. Okay, great, let's add 3 questions to vet that. And besides the base form questions I'm showing you, when you get into ransomware preparedness and endpoint protection, you're like, oh yeah, we use CrowdStrike Falcon. The question includes, is it in auto quarantine mode, whatever tool you just answered in the question above it? The configuration questions are much more in depth than you all think they are. Including, it's like, how many privileged accounts do you have? How many Active Directory accounts do you have? The number should be almost 0. How many privileged accounts do you have that are able to run as system administrator? Should be almost none. Now, all the tool vendors used to, and not the ones here at the conference, but they used to say, I need God access for my tool to run. That's not true. It never has been true every time somebody's asked me for God access. They need like 4 permissions, but they don't want to configure your network, so they just tell you they need system admin. Microsoft has been good, and I don't work for them anymore, but I used to, and I still don't speak for them, or Aon, or anybody else, including my parents. There's a lot more discussion now about pushback on overprivileged tools, on overprivileged access, even for backups, even for SEMSOAR. You have to get ahead of that. You have to push back on those vendors and say, no, this is not going to work in the next 3 to 6 months. Please come up with a better process, or we're going to have to look at tools that do. And you're going to drive that very thing of a requirement that the tool vendors must get better about, because we all have to get better about it. And I'm not going to, you notice, I don't want to pick on any logos, but all the attacks are moving to the zero trust infrastructure. They're attacking the password vaults. They're attacking the MFA with MFA fatigue, or trying to insert code into the MFA tools, or have MFA man in the middle or person in the middle attacks. The bad guys are just changing tactics. There is no silver bullet of zero trust or ubiquitous MFA. They'll come up with new tactics. But great question. The questions do get more and more in depth because of that root cause analytic handshake. Please. And thank you for that, for being brave enough to get up and be the first question. Appreciate it.
Hey, Bryan, thanks for your comments. I started chatting with an organization. I've never heard this combination of businesses, and I think you can actually speak pretty well to it. There's a combination of a sort of a basic cybersecurity platform with cybersecurity insurance. I don't know if you know anything about that, or have you seen sort of a trend?
Well, what I'm seeing is there's a great trend and wonderful companies in GRC and continuous GRC, which is great. However, it's a write once, use once kind of thing, where you do all of that and you get all these great dashboards, but it doesn't help you get insurance. It may fill out some of your regulators' forms, but it doesn't align with the fact that you can actually go take it and have it be an application to get another service for the organization. Similarly, I've seen a disconnect where the people in this room spend all the time filling this out and then get nothing back. You spent all that time, they said, okay, we got insurance. Has anybody actually ever read your homeowner's insurance policy? Yeah. Did you read it before the basement flooded or after? I read it after. Exactly. Please read it beforehand. Know who your fire departments are, know who your ServPro is, know who your incident responders are, who's your outside counsel. If you don't know what an outside counsel is, let's talk. And hopefully, for all that energy you put into it, you get something like this out of it. How well did you score? How did that underwriter view you? What can I learn from what they complained about that we can use to fix our infrastructure and talk about our architecture? Which I think, as I look at time, I am just on time to lead into a wonderful discussion of zero trust architecture then and now. So I'll invite Richard up to do the transition.